Just before we leave your domain itself, just run us quickly through a number of the Grand Cru that you work with and give us, the personalities of those Grand Cru. Yeah, I mean, I was very interested to hear you sort of suggest that Grand Cru is almost the easiest wine to make because it's where things tend to happen naturally, correctly.
They're very privileged places to grow Pinot Noir.
Yeah.
There's no question. And so starting from the north, we do a Chambertin, which is more of a blend of Chambertin and Chambertin Claude Bèze.
Okay.
And it's mostly Claude Bèze, actually, but Claude Bèze is a sub-entity of Chambertin. So
Often thought to be, the greatest red Burgundy.
It's it's very special, for sure. I had not realized to what extent it was. We make an average of 4 barrels of Chambertin. We don't own the land, and making small quantities is harder than making slightly larger quantities. At least you lack the inertia, etc. But that's where you see a real Grand Cru. That's one of the places you can see a real Grand Cru, among other things, is its ability for things to go right more often than not. And it ferments well, it extracts well, it does things that if I put the same volume of Village grapes would be trickier.
Really?
I think there'd be more uncertainty about the final result. It goes very well. Chambertin is the Grand Crus have a fullness to them. And that's why you don't need to blend them, among other reasons. And that's, of all of the wines I make, Chambertin is perhaps the fullest. I feel it. There's a feeling there's nothing you'd want to change, move out of place, or anything like that. There's structure, but it's never drying. There's fruit, but it's not overwhelming. There's length, and from the start you can feel that there's depth. It takes time to unpeel those layers and reveal everything. But sometimes you don't necessarily need to know what's inside something to feel that there is something inside. And I guess you get that impression with really exciting wines in youth. And Chambertin, I feel, is the one where we're tasting right from the start, from the fermenting must. We usually really have that impression of this has something behind it. Charme Chambertin would be the next one. That's a blend of Mazoyer and Charme Chambertin. We've roughly 50-50, I think, between the two Grand Crus. And again, you're allowed to blend them because Mazoyer is considered the sub part of Charme. And that's turned. It used to be a slightly light wine that was quite angular. And in the 90s, we modified the pruning. Then we brought in cover crops because they were not young vines, but they were productive. They were not beautiful genetic selection. And as the competition really helped bring things forward, but it was really when we moved to organic and biodynamic that all of a sudden it filled out. And the Echezot went in the other direction, so we'll talk about that afterwards. But the Charme Chambertin went from being not enough flesh on the bones, and so all of a sudden it filled out and has become the most fruit-rich, powerful, brawny wine in the cellar. And it's now, and so that one I toned down a little bit on the whole cluster side of it because I want that fruit to come to the fore. I feel like the spice becomes a bit distracting and seems a little confected or artificial, whereas that fruitiness just really comes from the heart of the wine. The Creux de la Roche after, so that's we're into our historical holdings. I feel is a wine which has some of the power. You can see some of the kinship with Chambertin, I feel a little bit. We're in the same altitude curve, and I think a lot of I've heard from Laurent Ponceau that a lot of Creux de la Roche once got sold as Chambertin. That's lost in the
bad old
times,
days.
but exactly in the bad old days. But I can see how they share some elements, but there's more spice to Creux de la Roche. I was talking about that nutmeg musk side and the slightly feral side of Moret, and that's really Creux de la Roche that I'm thinking of when I say that, but we find it in the Village wines, we find it in the Premier Cru wines too. And there's a grain of tannin that's quite different between Creux de la Roche and Clos Saint-Denis, because in Clos Saint-Denis, which is very close to Creux de la Roche, but is a bit more in the Combe, there's a different microclimate. Maybe, I think the soil depths are very similar. There's maybe a few more rolled rocks underneath, but Clos Saint-Denis is always a bit lighter. much lighter in tannin, silkier in tannin, and has that floral side that I mentioned earlier. And I think it's the most elegant of the wines of Moret. And some years are Clos de Roche years, some years are Clos Saint-Denis years. I can't quite pick a higher quality in terms of objective quality, but my heart is probably a bit more with Clos Saint-Denis because I love the delicacy it can have when we nail the picking date and get it right. And then next to the south for us is Bonne Mare, which I always think of as an athletic wine. It's got visible structure, it's muscular and powerful, but it really takes time to age. Mm-hmm. Bonne Mare, I feel like a ready Bonne Mare is a seldom seen creature because it's usually at least 25 or 30 years old.
Right.
And
most of it's been drunk by then, of course.
And a lot of it has been drunk and hopefully enjoyed. But it feels like it ages much slower than the others. The fact is, they all seem to have a peak. I think I find that you rarely go wrong at age 25, but it takes a young wine buyer to really have that sort of depth of cellar. Mm. But that's an age at which they're almost always good. But Bonne Mare, it's almost a little frustrating how closed and reserved it can be in youth. And then further to the south, we go to Echezeaux, which looked a lot like the Chambertin in the early 90s, where it was also a little bit angular, a little four-square, and a little slight, to be honest. And we moved that one to organic and biodynamic, and we saw a big shift happen. And where the Chambertin went towards more fleshiness to dress the bones, in the case of the Echezeaux, it moved towards a softening in the structure, and a more from kind of chunky tannin, we've gone to much finer grained tannin. And the Echezeaux is now much more delicately textured, and I find quite a beautiful wine, where we're now seeing a bit more of the. For a long time, I felt in that vineyard, we never saw that Chambol was just across the path from because we're really not that far from the Combe d'Orvaux, and it's a quick divide. And now we're feeling it more. We feel like we're not that far from Chambol. And then our furthest south, our southernmost Grand Cru is we have a tiny piece of Romanée Saint-Vivant that we farm for the owner. We make on average about 600 liters a year, so it's not big. I was talking about those small ferments, and Romanée Saint-Vivant is, I think, at the edge of what tends to go well most years. Although some of my colleagues have expertise with tiny lots, even smaller. I've been impressed by the tannins in Romanée Saint-Vivant. Romanée Saint-Vivant is elegant, and there's a velvetiness to those tannins year in, year out, and it's, it never disappoints on that front, or it has yet to disappoint, I should say. We've only been making it 15 years, but it's been, you taste it, you're looking during the extraction, and where you have to be wary of the tannins in Chambertin becoming too much in Romanée Saint-Vivant. I get the feeling I could keep it in tank 10 days, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I'd probably, over time, end up in the same place. The personality is that strong.